Have you ever gotten the feeling like, you've been somewhere before? Oh yeah, we've definitely been down this track before. In the 1990s, General Electric introduced its Dash 9 series locomotives, and to date, they are the most successful diesel locomotives of the 21st century. The popularity of the model, which replaced their earlier Dash 8 line, was due to their reliability, simplicity, and powerful prime mover, which have become traits that GE is known for. BNSF number 615 is a former Santa Fe Dash 9 44CW that was shipped off to the GE shops in San Luis Potosi, Mexico back around 2015. The unit received extensive rebuilding, including an overhauled prime mover, AC traction equipment, and new trucks. The goal of BNSF was to create AC4400CWs out of the 600 series C44s. In addition to the overhaul of the existing FDL engine and cooling systems, the DC-2-AC modernization included replacing the original cab of the DC Super Cab Control Group, that's the entire forward section of the long hood assembly behind the cab, with the standardized AC auxiliary cab, which houses the CCA control system panels and harnesses that are applied to a brand new Evolution Series AC locomotive. New high adhesion trucks and traction motors completed the conversion. The end result is that you get the best of both worlds, a service-proven FDL engine and Gevos control. How will this benefit the BNSF? Possibly lower traction motor maintenance expense and eventually less spare parts inventory costs, and maybe even fewer road failures, which means higher locomotive availability. Also, DC-specific component parts removed can be used on the remaining DC units. Building off of that same BNSF program that resulted in the creation of their AC traction units classified as the AC44C6M, Norfolk Southern and GE started on a similar rebuilding program. The goal was to turn NS's standard cab Dash 9s into a wide cab AC traction locomotive, or basically a brand new AC4400CW. But unlike the BNSF program, Norfolk Southern's units used 6 powered axles versus the 4 powered axle arrangement found on the BNSF units. BNSF felt that it wasn't worth it to add tractive effort by using 6 traction motors. One can see their point since they have over 1,000 ES44C4s and are using them in all types of service. The A1A style trucks must clearly be working well for them, so the conversion saved them a lot of money over a new locomotive and added another 15 plus years of service to the converted one. The C40-9 and its wide cab variant was a D-rated Dash 9 that was built specifically for the Norfolk Southern from the mid-1990s through the mid-2000s. The first 125 of these units came with the standard cab instead of the common wide cab of today. Spotting the standard cab Dash 9s is relatively easy, as they have an air conditioning box on top of the cab as opposed to their Dash 8 predecessors. At the time of their purchase, it was rumored that NS was simply too frugal to purchase the safety cabs, but eventually NS was required by the FRA to purchase the wide cab design. It also didn't hurt that GE started charging the same price for the wide cab as for the standard cab locomotive. One of the most noticeable spotting features over the Dash 8s is that the Dash 9 was one of the first to be equipped with GE's high adhesion or HTC truck, which helped to improve the wheel-to-rail contact. With the increased cost and complexity of new locomotives, many railroads are finding a renewed appetite and enthusiasm for rebuilding, upgrading, and modernization new programs for older power. And as precision scheduled railroading continues to take hold over the big Class 1s, traditional business operating models are being mothballed as diesel locomotive builders team up with railroad shops and contract shops in the reincarnation and reviving of motive power makeovers to firm new levels. It would seem that for the first time, a new era in the production of diesel locomotives has begun where upgrades and new locomotive sales are considered pretty much on equal footing. From the relatively simple but effective Dash 3 upgrades such as those found on the CSX, to the more complicated DC to AC conversions, to EMD Eco repowering packages and even AC refreshing programs for SD70 Max, SD90 Max, and even GE AC4000s, rebuilding has become the latest fashion in modern day railroading. By far, the clear champion in motive power modernity is the Norfolk Southern. With the Juniata shops that it inherited from Conrail, NS maintains a long-standing practice of conducting in-house locomotive remanufacturing programs. The shops at Juniata ranks as one of the most productive locomotive shops in the world. In these historic halls, generations of workers of the Pennsylvania Railroad once built and rebuilt everything from the tiniest 040s to the mightiest K4 Pacifics. J1 Class 210-4s and duplex drive 4464Q2s and 4444T1s, not to mention the GG1 electrics. NS employees uphold the age-old traditions of transforming tired and worn-out SWs, Jeeps, and big SDs, and even GEs into better-than-new locomotives. Looking at a catalog of the NS rebuilds reveals a full spectrum of models with more range and variety than that of many of the big builders themselves. There are the MP15E upgrades of the MP15D switchers that we've talked about numerous times in our prior videos. There are the 4 and 6 axle slugs, some built from retired locomotives and others built from scratch with new frames, cabs, and car bodies. During August of 2017, the Juniata shops completed SD33 Eco number 6215, the 6th rebuild of an SD40/SD40-2 into this new NS model. The 6215 began its career in 1968 as Kansas City Southern number 620 and was one of 10 former KCS SD40s acquired by Conrail in 1993 from Pac Rail Leasing for a Dash 2 rebuilding program. Upon completion, it became Conrail number 6970 and later NS 3431. The 5 prior SD33 Eco units, 6210 through 6214, were completed in 2016. Along with the other Eco units, the 6215 has the two-tone green band added to the standard NS colors. The first 5 worked at Macon, Georgia's Brosnan Yard, with the 6215 eventually being assigned to Atlanta. These engines have been called Eco locomotives because they are designed with operating efficiencies that reduce emissions and fuel consumption. The 3,000 horsepower engines are Tier 3 compliant. Further south in Virginia, the Roanoke shops have been completing Dash 8.5-40CW units since 2015. The 8512 was converted from the Dash 840C number 8699 and arrived at Juniata on September 17, 2017 for testing and paint. In addition to the new wide-nose crescent cab assembly, these rebuilt Dash 8s received a number of electrical and mechanical upgrades, including improvements to become Tier 2 compliant. Utilizing GP38ACs, GP50s, and GP59s as core locomotives, Juniata turned out fleets of GP22s, GP23s, and GP59 Ecos. Outfitted with the Norfolk Southern design crescent cabs and upgraded with split cooling systems and new microprocessor controls, Juniata has churned out well over 130 SD60Es that were built from the cores of the SD60. In a similar program, former Union Pacific and CEFX 90 Max were converted into SD70ACUs with new Mitsubishi control systems and SD70ACE cabs. Progress Rail did some of the conversions, with most being completed at Altoona. In addition, Norfolk Southern has a multi-year deal with GE to perform DC to AC upgrades, converting DC traction Dash 9 44CWs to AC traction AC44C6Ms. GE is doing some of the work at their Erie, Pennsylvania shops and Fort Worth, Texas shops, while Juniata and Roanoke shops do the rest. The DC to AC program is an example of an increasing trend by builders to find, overhaul, rebuild, and do upgrade work to older engines to compensate for the declining sales of new locomotives. BNSF, CSX, and KCS have all been involved in programs to breathe new life and Dash 3 electronics into their aging 4-axle EMDs. BNSF made news recently when it bought back several dozen retired GP30s sold to Larry's Truck and Electric in 2011. The reacquired EMDs joined a growing fleet of Bensev GP35s and Jeep 38s reincarnated as the GP39-3s. So for all of you rail fans watching this, pay close attention. The modern-day Class 1 motive power scene is dominated by wide cabs nearly 30,000 strong, but there are still a lot of rarities on Class 1s that still exist. However, age, trends, and modernity are rapidly pushing these endearing older locomotives into irrelevancy. So, shoot them today because you don't know if you're going to have them tomorrow. The AC44C6M is a 4,400 horsepower diesel locomotive that was rebuilt by GE Transportation Systems, American Motive Power, and Norfolk Southern's own Juniata and Roanoke shops. It underwent an extensive rebuild which included a new wide cab like those found on the ES44AC and GE's AC traction motors, all while retaining its original 16-cylinder prime mover. Internally, the AC44s have a new under-the-floor air conditioner, cab signals, locomotive speed limiter, DPU capability, PTC, and electronic parking brake. They also feature emissions upgrades, new trucks, plus they're ballasted to 432 pounds. All of these represent significant technological improvements over the original Dash 9 models. The first 6 units were painted in special paint schemes. The 4000 and 4001 were released in December 2015. The 4000 was rebuilt from number 8799 and the 4001 was reincarnated from the 8879. Both were painted in a blue, gold, and gray scheme called the Sonic Boom or the Sonic Bonnet. These units were rebuilt by American Motive Power in Dansville, New York under a contract with General Electric. Units 4002 and 4003 were painted in a black, Tuscan red, and gray scheme, meaning that they were rebuilt at the shops at Roanoke. The 4004 and 4005 are in the black, blue, and gray scheme, which means that these units were rebuilt at the Juniata shops. Personally, I think the colors should have been transposed. Tuscan red at the Altoona shops, blue at the Roanoke shops. Looking at the first 75 of these engines, all of the first 6 units had the DC-to-AC waveform lettering underneath the cab windows. The standard cab units, which were originally numbered from 8764 to 8888, will be renumbered into the 4000 through 4124 number series. Units 4006 through 4017 were rebuilt by GE at Erie, Pennsylvania, while the 4018 through 4042 was rebuilt by GE at Fort Worth, Texas. Units 4043 through 4052 were rebuilt by NS's Roanoke shops, with the 4053 through 4074 being rebuilt at Juniata. The 4004 made multiple appearances on the Buffalo line in December of 2016 when we caught it towing unit coal train number 632 past the former Pennsylvania Railroad shops at Renoval, Pennsylvania on December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas. The 4004 operated on the Norfolk Southern H57 local train out of Lock Haven for several days and made 2 turns on the 632 and 633 coal trains to and from the Port of Baltimore, Maryland. This was one of those turns. As I pointed out in prior videos, the 4017 was, at that time, the newest engine on the Norfolk Southern roster. A few months later, during April of 2017, the 14th to be exact, the 4001 was involved in a derailment that injured 2 crew members. It was leading yet another coal train. This time it was the 593 when it and SD70ACC number 1036 and 20 cars left the rails in McVeytown, Pennsylvania. Both locomotives suffered major damage. Nearly a year later, on March 18, 2018, the 4063 was trailing in a head-on crash in Scott County, Kentucky. It landed on the GE-9 leading the train, damaging its frame, trucks, and the leading unit under it completely. In August 2017, Norfolk Southern made an agreement with General Electric to rebuild 500 wide-cab Dash 9 locomotives into AC44s. These units will be built from 2018 through 2022, with 100 units to be rebuilt every year. 50 by GE and 50 by NS at its Juniata and Roanoke shops. In October 2017, the Canadian Pacific started a similar program with its older AC4400CW fleet, with their rebuilds being classified as AC4400CWMs instead. CP's ACs are being rebuilt to the same specs as NS's, except that their cores were built with AC traction to begin with. Canadian Pacific number 8000 began life as CP-9521 in the summer of 1995 in Erie, Pennsylvania. It was rebuilt at its birthplace with a new cab, electronics, and control systems, as well as its new locomotive designation, the AC4400CWM. In GE's vernacular, the M is said to stand for modified. Over on the Union Pacific, GE's rebuilding craze continued when Union Pacific sent C44/60AC number 7342, a D-rated AC6000CW, to GE Erie for rebuilding. A product of the short-lived horsepower race of the mid-1990s, GE's AC6000CW became an early candidate for the modernization and standardization. In contrast to its best-selling AC4400CW, GE sold less than 200 of the 6,000 horsepower beasts to domestic customers, 197 to be exact, 117 to CSX, and 80 to the Union Pacific. While caught up in the recent downsizing of the CSX fleet, the 6,000 horsepower ACs were recently retired and sold to Progress Rail, while the Union Pacific fleet soldiers on in heavy coal and drag service. These units, unlike the Norfolk Southern and CP rebuilds, only got updated control systems and new wiring. There were no new cabs or AC equipment upgrades for these units, but they did get upgrading to current Evolution Series locomotive control software and a new electrical cabinet while keeping their original 16-cylinder prime mover. Union Pacific calls these engines the C44ACM. But wait, why would NS or any other railroad for that matter want to convert a locomotive from DC to AC traction in the first place? Well, here's some of the basics. Any electric motor, such as a traction motor, requires the reversal of a magnetic field within the motor, and there are two ways that you can achieve this. A DC or direct current locomotive uses commutators on the rotor that are in physical contact with a brush to achieve the field reversal. Because of this physical contact, these locomotives require more physical maintenance. DC traction motors also have a nasty reputation for burning themselves up at low speeds, making DC locomotives less than ideal at low speeds. Example, heavy coal trains on a grade. AC or alternating current locomotives use the basic nature of the current running through them to achieve the field reversal. Because of this, no physical contact is required between the rotor or anything else. Because of this, they require less physical maintenance on the locomotive as well. AC traction locomotives perform very well in low-speed service. Again, heavy coal trains on a grade. This is the main reason the ES44ACs and SD70ACE were purchased by the Norfolk Southern. With all of this as background, and despite the fact that the major locomotive builders haven't delivered a North American DC locomotive since 2010, the Big Six Class 1 railroads have more than 9,000 high-horsepower DC locomotives on their rosters. And while this armada of middle-aged Dash 9s, SD70Ms, and DC Gevos aren't leaving their railroads rosters anytime soon, in an AC world, their DC technology and its inherent limitations can be an Achilles heel. That being said, despite the fact that AC locomotives sound like a dream come true to all of your locomotive problems, there is one major drawback: money. Anything and everything good about AC traction requires more complex systems, which in turn means that AC locomotives had a significantly higher upfront cost. They also can be more of a pain to maintain due to the complex systems, which is probably why NS shied away from AC traction for as long as it did. So the economic debate as to whether or not any railroad would rather pay the significantly higher upfront cost of an AC loco or just pay the cost of replacing the commutators on a DC loco, each road had their own philosophy. And as I mentioned in a prior video, NS was to hold out until 2008 when they ordered their first 24 new AC-powered diesels, the ES44AC. The primary reason was due to a shift in motive power philosophy on the NS. Often a railroad's policy is based on the views of the people who work there and eventually retire. For example, back in the 1960s, a guy named Dave Newhart wanted truly big locomotives for the Union Pacific, hence the ginormous Centennials and other double-engine hybrids from GE and Alco. In heavy haul service where the AC traction units are typically assigned, you're able to use fewer locomotives. Previously, where 3 DC traction units may have been used, 2 AC units could handle the same train. To be sure, the 2 AC units may not be able to haul that train as fast as the 3 DC units, but speed isn't always the most important factor. Fewer locomotives translates into overall lower fuel consumption due to fewer units, and reduced maintenance costs all factor in. That's what the logic was when NS started choosing the ES44AC over the ES40DC. We witnessed this way of thinking firsthand in Renovo back in that December of 2016 when those 3 R.J. Corman SD40-2s handed off that 130-car coal train to the 2 AC44C6Ms. The Buffalo line speed limit between the interchange point at Keating all the way to around Northumberland had been downgraded from 50 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour earlier that same year. BNSF, however, seems to have more or less standardized AC power on their low-speed coal trains, but DC power on their fast intermodal trains, the new ES44C4s notwithstanding, while Union Pacific seems to be putting ACs on everything. NS and CN used to say that they could run any train that fits their railroad sidings lengths with 2 modern DC units. Well, no kidding. But as we learned in a few videos back, NS got some early experience with the Conrail SD80 Max, so to sum it up, AC power requires more complex control systems but also has much more rugged traction motors. NS mostly and CN, at least in the first 20 or so years, had decided that it was far cheaper and easier to continue replacing the commutators. Which one is right? Personally, I couldn't say, and despite the fact that the first AC locomotives came out around 30 years ago, I still couldn't give you an honest answer on whether AC locomotives were worth the upfront money. From the standpoint of NS, they decided early on that DC traction did the job, and while AC traction had some advantages, they just felt that the advantages did not equal the higher upfront costs. Kind of like when GE started charging the same price for standard cab and wide cab Dash 9s back in the 1990s. But AC units are now on the downward sloping price scale. It's simple economics when you think about it. The longer they produce them, the cheaper they get. At a certain point, the added cost is low enough to equal the advantage. At the same time, DC traction units are on an upward pricing scale as the demand diminishes. And as fewer and fewer DC locomotives are produced, the price for DC traction actually goes up. Pretty much like any technology, like cars and computers, the older they get, often the harder it is to find parts for them. At a certain point, these two pricing slopes cross each other, and at some point, NS had to make the move to the most current technology, as the builders may want to get out of building DC units altogether and will price the DC locos higher to make them even less desirable. Kind of like what Conrail did to rail service on many lines in Pennsylvania. But I'm mixing apples and oranges here. Getting back to the DC locomotives, once nobody orders them anymore, they'll probably go the way of the dodo. CSX and BNSF have more or less the same approach when it comes down to power utilization on their railroads. On CSX, AC units will show up on pretty much anything every once in a while, but on the coal corridors like the old Clinchfield and C&O main lines, you can expect 90% AC traction to be the rule, with anything else being the exception. Stack trains got mostly DC Gevos and to some extent some of the older C40-8Ws and the few C44-9s they had on hand. For a while they were using AC6000s too until they fell out of favor with them. The SD40 locomotive and its many variants was the pinnacle of EMD's domination of the diesel locomotive market of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The downward spiral began with the SD50, which was introduced in the mid-1980s and from which EMD has yet to recover. In the 21st century, Norfolk Southern looked to Progress Rail for AC upgrading options for its SD70 fleet, including the standard cabs from 1993 through 1998 and the few SD70Ms. In 2017, NS number 2537 and 2548 were sent to Muncie, Indiana for their DC to AC conversion and modernization. The locomotives were stripped down, overhauled, and received new Mitsubishi AC traction equipment. The two received a stylish, newly designed cab along with AC traction motors that were fit into the existing EMD HTCR trucks. They were released for testing in early 2018 as the NS SD70ACCs number 1800 and 1801 as the prototypes for at least 50 more units on order. In 2018, Norfolk Southern began sending retired SD70s to the Progress facility in Mayfield, Kentucky for teardown before going to Muncie for rebirth. Given the success of NS's rebuilding program, EMD's ACC concept might one day be of interest to other SD70 and SD75 owners such as the CN and the UP. especially when you consider that Union Pacific has a fleet of more than 1,400 aging SD70Ms. When the CP and UP retired their H-engine-equipped SD90 Max and stored or retired most of their SD90-43 Mac cousins, the Norfolk Southern saw a golden opportunity. Looking for ways of expanding its roster of modern AC power, NS worked out an arrangement with Progress Rail in 2014 for 100 former Union Pacific SD90-43 Max, and upping the ante by 10 more from the CEFX lease fleet. NS quickly amassed a substantial fleet of second-hand AC locomotives. Some of those engines immediately went into service, with most going straight into Altoona for rebuilding. Designated as the NS SD70ACU, the former SD90 Max have been modernized with new cabs, new Mitsubishi electronics, New York air brake and cab signals, PTC capability, and DPU capability. Also on the bucket list was a similar program for the former Conrail SD80 Max. A long fixture in Pennsylvania coal service, the units will be overhauled, upgraded with Mitsubishi inverters, EMD fire control, Ultra cab signals, New York air brake, and boosted to 432,000 pounds and a whopping 5,500 horsepower. Just like the ACUs, they'll be a mix of old and new, receiving new cabs and control systems while retaining their 20-cylinder EMD 710 engines and Siemens traction motors. Further up north, after failing to sell its troublesome SD90 Max, CP along with Progress Rail will upgrade at least 30 of the long-stored locomotives to SD70ACU specs. With all the talk that we've done about the big six-axle road locomotives, it can't be forgotten that the trend toward locomotive modernization began with the four-axle Jeeps, which included some of the oldest power in North America. And even with precision-scheduled railroading and changes in operating philosophy, cannibalization of some routes, and the consolidation and downsizing of many secondary fleets, Class 1 railroads still operate some 7,000 EMT GP9s and SDs. 4- and 6-axle road switchers remain the backbone of secondary fleets, and to capitalize on this market, builders like Rail Power, National Railway Equipment, and Motive Power have also been modernizing older EMDs, along with EMD itself, who in 2010 re-entered the fray with its own 710 Eco repowered diesel line. Canadian Pacific took the Eco program very seriously, but also had to face some hard facts about its GP7 and GP9 fleet. Despite significant upgrades made in the 1980s, the fleet, originally from the 1950s, had reached a critical point in their lives, and given that they represented 11% of CP's power and operated system-wide, there was no way that the endearing EMDs could be ignored. Progress Rail came in with a solution, the GP20C-Eco. Taking the Jeeps in trade-in and salvaging key components to meet EPA rules, the GP20C-Eco offered up a new road switcher design complete with an 8-cylinder 710 engine rated at 2,000 horsepower. Existing trucks and some other components were kept, however the GP20 model featured a new underframe, operator cabs, and hood. CP initially rebuilt 30 units in 2012 through 13, but quickly returned for 100 more over the course of 2 years, and in one swift stroke, approximately 130 GP20C-Ecos replaced CP's entire fleet of first-generation Jeeps. Now that's progress. And CP's Eco ambitions didn't stop there. The railway contracted Progress Rail yet again, this time to rebuild 20 retired SD40-2s as SD30C-Ecos. At the Mayfield, Kentucky facility, the locomotives were stripped down to the frame and rebuilt with a 12-cylinder 710 engine, new crash-worthy cab and microprocessor controls with an upgraded cooling system complete with larger flared radiators akin to the legendary SD45s of the 1960s. Moving our way back to the south, even CSX has dabbled in the Eco products game with SD33 Ecos. Rebuilt from SD40-2 cores, designated as SD40E3, changes in CSX management a la one E. Hunter Harrison stalled and may be stopped any further rebuilds and upgrades. But not every railroad can justify the money to fully ecoize their fleets. For those who can't, or won't, a variety of solutions still remain. The most common one is the traditional overhaul of Jeeps and SDs, which extends their lives. Most secondary fleets only run a fraction of the mileage and megawatt hours of the road units, so diesels upgraded and overhauled for this purpose will be ready for another generation of service. When it comes down to it, Railroading in the 21st century is a mixed-up, mad world of overhauls, modernization programs, and motive power makeovers. Old DCs are going AC. Rehabilitated Macs are back in service and are better than ever. Best of all, timeless EMD Jeeps and SDs continue to carry on. But that is another video. For Trains 21, call me AC.